Hi, welcome back. So we're in chapter 4, inferential statistics on the subject of hypothesis testing. Let me take you to a visual presentation of the subject. Basically, the inferential was to tackle two important tasks, the quality of each one of these points, right? And how did that happen? That's related to construct an interval. Now, the second thing actually inferential analysis is trying to do is the hypothetical assumption. Now, let's come back to your research question. There are three possible scenarios. First scenario, that one of the point from the sample is equal to, even with the larger or less than a certain value. So a point against hypothesized value. Or the point isn't equal to, or maybe only larger or smaller, a certain value. These are two possible outcome of scenario 1. The second scenario, it's about 2 points. Now, these 2 points could be from the same sample or could be from two different samples. Maybe you're trying to work on the equality between these points, even with larger or less, or maybe they are not equal, only maybe with larger or less. Doesn't really matter. Third scenario, it's about the variables. You're trying to prove there is a relationship between them, or maybe there is no relation. I would call this the first scenario with the hypothesized value scenario. The second one I would call the comparison scenario. And the third one is about a relationship scenario and dependency. Now, look exactly how inferential analysis, according to the scenario, the possible two outcome to a world of null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. If I'm talking about a null hypothesis, I'm talking about equality, even with larger or less, doesn't matter. If alternative, the non-equality, even with larger only or less only. So the possible outcome from this work when it comes to the second hypothesis testing of inferential perspective, either to reject this null hypothesis or to fail to reject it. In other words, either to reject the equality or fail to reject. When you reject the null hypothesis, it means you're saying the alternative is true. And what is the alternative? That they are not equal, larger, or smaller. I want just to remind you, in the first chapter, I introduced you to statistical power, this matrix decision. In reality, I introduced you to the world of alpha when the null hypothesis is true. And what does it mean, the null hypothesis in reality is true? It means the equality is true when the null hypothesis is false. And we call it this as the beta world. And we wanted to make sure you accept the null hypothesis when it is true and you reject it when it is false. Now, the question once again, how can I reach out to this based on a statistical test? Could be actually a lot of tests out there, but how to choose the right test, which test to choose, to decide which test we're going to choose, it will be according to the scenario. So you might have, as I said, scenario 1, scenario 2, or scenario 3. Now, each scenario is accompanied by different number of tests. So you will choose the right test according to the scenario you're interested in. Now you will take these points and you feed it into that test. And this test, of course, according to the scenario, as we said, right, will spell out one value. You will ask a very important question on which level of confidence I want to reject or to fail to reject. Now, according to the level, automatically, it will be constructed the margin of error, which happens to be here, only 10% or 5 or 1. This is the usual one. When can I reject the null hypothesis? When this value from the test happens to be less than this margin of error. But when I'm going to fail to reject that null hypothesis, it happens when this value from that test is larger than the margin of error. Once you're done with that, then your final research will be sounding scientifically correct. You're choosing one test exactly as if looking at this apple and trying, for example, if you want to find the color of this apple or the weight of this apple, or the size of this apple. Choosing the right instrument or the right test is exactly the same. If you want to look at the real color of this apple, then you're going to choose a visual tool. If you want to look at the weight of this apple, you're going to choose a scale. Otherwise, if a size, maybe you need a plural or something like that. So choosing the test, it's a very important skill you must understand in order to come up with the right conclusion or summary to your research. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the following 2 points. First, we're going to learn about some factors about hypothesis and choosing the right test. And finally, I'm going to give you a roadmap to let you choose the right test. I will see you then.